In 1604, the French explorer Samuel de Champlain sailed along the Maine coast and documented a natural harbor protected by a dozen small islands. He called it a Port aux Îles, a location known today as Cape Porpoise. The approach into this harbor is incredibly difficult. The main channel is deep but incredibly narrow, and ships have to navigate around a dangerous underwater rock formation called the Old Prince Ledge, sitting just a quarter-mile from the harbor's entrance. By the 1800s, Cape Porpoise was exporting massive amounts of lumber and fish. Dozens of commercial schooners and small fishing vessels were trying to squeeze through this precarious inlet at the exact same time. The local merchants and shipbuilders realized they needed a navigational aid, and in 1830 they formally petitioned Congress for a lighthouse. Entering the harbor with a large vessel was almost impossible without a fair wind. A lighthouse here was necessary to keep the local maritime economy functioning and to prevent crews from drowning on the ledges. Congress approved $6,000 for the project, and by August 1833, a 20-foot rubble stone tower and a small stone keeper's dwelling went into service on Goat Island, right at the harbor's edge. But the construction was a disaster. 10 years later, a civil engineer named I.W.P. Lewis inspected the station and submitted a brutal report to Congress. He found the tower was held together by low-quality lime mortar. The keeper's house had cracked walls and no proper foundation, settling unevenly into the dirt. The people assigned to operate the light lived in abysmal conditions. The roofs leaked constantly, the well water on the island was brackish and completely unfit to drink. By winter, the structural cracks made several rooms inside the dwelling uninhabitable due to the freezing minute. The government had funded an engineering failure. Instead of providing a sturdy piece of maritime infrastructure, they built a crumbling hazard, forcing the keepers to survive the elements while simultaneously trying to protect the ships off the coast. The Lighthouse Board finally intervened in 1859, funding a proper 25-foot brick tower and outfitting it with a fifth-order Fresnel lens. A Fresnel lens is a specialized piece of optical glass that uses concentric rings to capture and bend light from a single lamp into a highly visible, focused beam. Between 1865 and 1920, 46 different vessels crashed onto the dangerous ledges near the lighthouse. But look at the secondary metric at the bottom. Across all 46 wrecks over 55 years, the number of lives lost is exactly 0. Every single sailor survived because the lighthouse keepers operated as a rapid response rescue team. George Wakefield, who served at the station for 33 years, exemplified this. On the morning of New Year's Day, 1920, 2 schooners ran aground in rough seas. Wakefield spotted them instantly, contacted the Coast Guard, and coordinated a response that pulled both crews to safety before the ships were pounded to pieces. The brick tower and the glass lens could warn a captain about the ledge, but when a ship actually hit the rocks, it was the vigilance and physical courage of the keepers that kept the sailors alive. Between those dramatic rescues, the keepers faced a grueling daily routine. Maintaining the light required constant physical labor and total isolation from the mainland. The early lamps burned whale oil and later kerosene, creating heavy smoke and moisture. Keepers routinely had to climb into the freezing lantern room 3 times a night just to wipe the heavy condensation off the glass so the light could actually be seen. They also endured the full force of Atlantic weather. In a 1947 storm, Coast Guardsman Joseph Bakken realized his dog and newborn puppies were missing. He waded into the station's dark, flooded cellar and found them floating in a wooden box on top of several feet of swirling seawater, pulling them out just in time. Kathleen Stinson, the daughter of a keeper who served in the 1930s, noted that living on 3 acres of rock required intense psychological endurance. She recalled that the best part of the experience was the enforced closeness, learning to survive side by side with 1 or 2 other families. Surviving on Goat Island forged a unique bond. The keepers and their families relied completely on each other to endure the weather, the isolation, and the immense responsibility of the light. By the late 20th century, technology caught up with the station. In 1976, the Coast Guard announced a plan to fully automate the Goat Island light and permanently remove the human keepers to save money. The local residents of Cape Porpoise immediately fought back. They argued that removing the human presence would leave the historic station vulnerable to vandalism and decay. The community pushed back so hard that the government delayed the automation process for another 14 years. Finally, in the fall of 1990, Goat Island became the last lighthouse in Maine to be automated. The Coast Guard removed the classic Fresnel lens, installed a modern optic, and the final resident keepers packed up and left. But the island wasn't abandoned. The Kennebunkport Conservation Trust eventually took ownership of the property. Local volunteers and caretakers spent decades replacing the roofs, rebuilding the fog bell tower, and carefully restoring the entire station to its 1950s appearance. Goat Island demonstrates the limits of modernization. A timer and a new light bulb can automate a signal, but preserving the history and the structure itself requires people. Today, the local community serves as the new keepers, protecting the station that protected their harbor for over a century.